Well, good day. This is Kathleen Caldwell, founder of C-Suite Network's Women's Coaching and Consulting Council. So delighted that we are here today featuring esteemed faculty member, Cindy Watson. Oh my goodness, so excited. Yes, exactly. And, it's not every day that we get to be on a call with a woman who actually started a new category and has written the book on the art of feminine negotiation. It's so exciting. So we're so grateful to have you here. Thank you very much, Cindy. We'll jump into our program here. I just want to set the stage because I think it's so important to set the context for our program today. And again, my name's Kathleen Caldwell. I'm an author, speaker, coach, hypnotherapist, and I am all about success. And I'm so delighted to be the founder of our council because we get every day to the opportunity and privilege to promote and showcase and highlight women coaches, trusted advisors, thought leaders, and consultants. So glad that all of you are here and also watching our replay today. Just want to do a big shout out here because we have had some incredible programs. Oh my goodness. We're really leaning in our council to topics that are timely and at the leading edge. We don't want to be on the bleeding edge, but we know we're on the leading edge. And Chat GPT, AI, and all of the new technologies are so incredibly hot. And I've been using them myself. If you've been using any of these new AI, give me a little heads up, thumbs up. Yeah, really, really hot. And we had a program 2 weeks ago led by esteemed faculty member, Christina DiGiacomo, that was so incredible. The replay is up on our YouTube channel. Really, really great. And since it was Groundhog Day, we just thought we would kind of have a little fun. And I live in Woodstock, Illinois now, where it's the home of the movie Groundhog Day. And so we were talking about how to break that Groundhog Day cycle in your business and in your life and your career. We also had a tremendous program about how to recession-proof your business, your career. What are the strategies we need to be looking at now to stabilize and diversify our careers in our business? That was a great program, again, on our YouTube channel. And then finally, we featured our esteemed faculty members in a great program about top tips for strategic success. And that was really super great on our YouTube channel. We're also using that as a program to do an ebook. We're going to have a downloadable ebook for each of you to be able to get the wisdom, the tips, the strategies from our very smart and talented esteemed faculty. So more on that in a little bit. But as we transition and welcome to the stage our esteemed faculty member, speaker Cindy Watson, I always like to set the context because you know that phrase, the context is decisive. And the content, of course, is today so timely. And, we're having a little chat before we started our program. And I don't know if there's a woman on the planet other than Cindy Watson who feels 110%, confident in negotiating. And, typically, I think negotiation, women think of negotiating pay raises and they think of career moves. But I think negotiation is so important for consultants and coaches as well, and for everyone, because we are leaving oftentimes money on the table. We're leaving things on the table that are so important to move ourselves forward. We're either not getting enough or we're not getting enough conciliatory agreement between us and the other person. And this is a topic that is so incredibly timely. And of course, the Harvard Negotiation School has a program on it as well. And so, if Harvard Law believes that this is important, well, we're in at the right time, aren't we? You don't need that because you're here with Cindy Watson today at our program. And, just to as we transition over to you, Cindy, and give you the stage, this is important because it's high stakes. It's everything, as you're going to talk about. It's business, it's life, it's everything is a negotiation. And you really opened my eyes to that. And so I just would love to welcome you to the stage because we are not the type of business women who put our head in the sand. We know that this is important because we need to be that lighthouse for the people in our lives, for our clients, for our colleagues, for our partners, for the people in our life. So we've got to know and be up on what's working now, what's not working, so we can be that lighthouse for ourselves and for others, because it's certainly stormy times. I'm sure you'd agree with me on this.
Yeah.
So welcoming to our stage, Cindy Watson, esteemed faculty member, C-Suite Network, Women's Coaching and Consulting Council. And so delighted to say congratulations to you, Cindy. Your book, oh my goodness, Wall Street Journal bestseller, top of the bestsellers in the Wall Street Journal. Yes, USA Today bestseller. We're so excited. You had a preview book out, and then I believe your actual hardbound book, paperback book, is coming out on March 4th. I checked it out on Amazon.
Yeah, you're good.
Big push to support you. So let's welcome you to the stage. You are the founder of Women on Purpose, a successful arbitration, mediation, labor lawyer with founder of Watson Labor Law. And you've been in business, not, I won't say for a long time, but you're certainly very successful as a young woman. And, you know, having written the book, we are so privileged to have you here. So with that, welcome to the stage, Cindy Watson. Thank you.
Well, thank you. What a great introduction. Thank you, Kathleen. Love your images, by the way, on your PowerPoint. So that's fabulous. And happy Galentine's and Valentine's week to everybody who's here. It is great to be here. And I was going to do a fancy PowerPoint, but I decided that I would prefer this sort of personal connection in the limited time that we have here together today, especially because I'm going to be speaking in part about connection. It's one of the important elements of the art of feminine negotiation. But I didn't want you to miss out, though, as I talk through some of these concepts that I'll be throwing at you. So I prepared a little resource page, a little kit, if you want to call it that. It includes links to 2 free ebooks on 2 of the models that I'm going to be talking about today, and access to book a consultation if you want to go deeper. I've put the link in the chat already. I will do that again and remind you before we finish off here. So don't be panicked about if I'm throwing acronyms going, oh, what was the 3rd letter stand for in that? You've got access to all of that here today. Feel free to grab that, and you can always reach out as well. And also I want you to have the opportunity to be sort of fully engaged, to sort of take in and maybe think of some questions that come up for you as I throw some of this at you, and jot down any questions, because we are definitely going to be doing a Q&A at the end. And I also want to congratulate all of you for the important work that you do. I've got to say, in C-Suite, the more I learn about your missions, you know, the more excited I was to share this opportunity to share the art of feminine negotiation, or the power of persuasion, as I like to call it, with you, because I believe it'll take your missions to the next level. So today we're going to explore why the art of feminine negotiation, or persuasion, is so important, and what the heck is it, which I'm sure some of you are wondering. And I'm going to share some really simple models from my art of feminine negotiation systems. Now, we're not going to be able to dig in, obviously, to each model today in 30 minutes, but I'll whet your appetite and show you how easy it is to apply some of these concepts and systems in your life to get more of what you want and deserve. And a lot of it is common sense, but I've been researching this for ages, and it doesn't seem to get pulled together in a way. I like to make things as easily accessible and easy to remember as possible, so that you can actually bring it to the table regularly as part of your negotiations. And I'll give you some takeaway tips for sure that you can start to apply right away. But before we dive in, I want to address 2 possible sticking points, because this happens all the time. So right out of the gate, I want you to not be distracted by language. The first sticking point that I often get is the use of the word negotiation. And frankly, a lot of my clients say to me, Cindy, why do you call what you do in your trainings all negotiation? Because it's really a lot more than that. You know, aren't you worried that a lot of people don't think they need negotiation? They don't see it as a priority, and then they're not going to get the benefit. And that is true. And I've really sort of agonized over that myself, but I choose to focus on negotiation because, you know, as Kathleen alluded to, all of life is a negotiation. At the macro level, right to the micro level, we negotiate every day in a myriad of ways. And I'm a big believer that the more we start lifting our awareness about that, we can show up with intention in all of those negotiations that we're engaged in, or worse, the negotiations that we're not engaging in, because we don't think of certain relationships as being a negotiation. When we can show up with intention, we're going to get more out of our life. We're going to get more in our relationships, the more we're going to be able to lift up those around us. And frankly, not to be overly dramatic, but the more I believe the world comes back into balance. So from negotiating our own mindset, which people don't think of as a negotiation. I say it's our first and most important negotiation, to negotiating our relationship, whether with our kids, intimate partners, service providers, multi-million-dollar transactions, or even to negotiating on the global scene, whether it's peace in the Middle East or a Russia-Ukraine dispute, the principles remain the same. So for example, for all you gorgeous, entrepreneurs, coaches, and consultants, negotiation is key, definitely for your mindset. If you are going to be your most successful self, you need to negotiate your mindset with intention. For your sales is a negotiation dance at its core, at its heart. And for your leadership in your business, with your staff, with your suppliers, with your clients, being able to lead within your communities and beyond. All of that is a form of negotiation. In addition to your mindset, your sales, your leadership, your relationships, just to name a few of the ways that negotiation is really critical for you. And it's interesting, I mentioned relationships, and a lot of people kind of go, I don't like the thought of seeing that as a negotiation. And most of my clients, I think, come to me at the front end for professional help, right? How to up-level their ability to get more professionally. And certainly we do that, but it's interesting, I think, and for most of them, the pleasant surprise is the profound impact that they find it has on their personal relationships and on their personal life as well. So I said there were two possible sticking points. That's one. I don't want you getting hung up on the language negotiation. And we already had a little chat before we started. I think a lot of women in particular tend to shy away from negotiation, going, I don't like the conflict. So I want you to put that out of your mind, because you are already negotiating in a million ways in where you probably don't think of it as negotiation. But the second sticking point or resistance point I often get is use of the word feminine. So let's just talk about the elephant in the room right out of the gate. When I speak of feminine, I am not necessarily speaking to gender. There is no one way to be a woman, a man, or any of the spaces in between. We all have masculine and feminine energy. And I've really been on a mission for some time now to reframe negotiation. And part of that, or included with that, is redefining conflict. How do we look at conflict? How do we look at power? How do we think about control? And at its core, redefining success. What we attach to, what we've been conditioned to believe success looks like. And my reframes have consistently focused on leaning into our feminine. That applies, frankly, for men or women. My focus is on women because I feel we've been behind the 8 ball much longer, but certainly the principles apply. And my reframes focus on leaning into our feminine because after much research, after decades, Kathleen was more gracious, after decades of practical application of this, I believe the solution starts with that simple shift, leaning in to your feminine. So in 2020, some of you may know I did a TEDx talk called The Rise of the Feminine Voice is the Key to Our Future. And the idea, the premise behind it was that the world is out of balance because we've lost touch with our feminine. Men and women, frankly. Now, this is not a new concept, but certainly then it was still being treated as novel, which is kind of surprising given that, the Dalai Lama, no less, has been talking about this for at least a decade and a half. I think every year for the last decade and a half, but, while he was with us, he's consistently said the time has come for women to take more active roles in all domains of human society in an age in which education and the capacities of the mind, not physical strength, define leadership. This could help create a more equitable and compassionate society. He had some version of that quote in most of his talks around the world for, as I say, over 15 years that I was able to track, maybe longer. Now, he did focus on the gender. He said it's about women. And I'd like to tweak that a little bit to say it's really more about all of us bringing more feminine energy to the table. It only took a decade and a half and a global pandemic, I think, for the message to be received. And I mentioned the pandemic because I think COVID, and I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are, I think COVID opened the world to a new way of thinking. It opened people to a new way of being. So I think the message is particularly timely now. I'm excited that we're here talking together now because I really invite you to take advantage of this opportunity. And I don't want to overstate it, but I really believe the time is now for you to be able to take advantage of, some of the skills we're going to talk about today to really leverage and catapult your business and to negotiate your best life. Because I think COVID allowed us, there's a new appreciation of the value of feminine energy, if you will, in business, in politics, and beyond. I know even in my business, I'm seeing now, I've been speaking about the art of feminine negotiation for some time, and now I'm suddenly being asked, speak at business schools and law symposiums and ombudsman's councils. I was asked to speak in Greece on feminine wisdom. And people started suggesting during COVID that countries with female leaders fared better during COVID. And I always say I don't want to get stuck in the muck of whether it's true or not true, because what matters to me out of that is that at the very least, the value of feminine stock went up, if you will. Feminine traits, certainly in my lifetime, I think we're being recognized as key leadership skills for the first time in a very, very long time. So as I say, the opportunity now for all of you to actually lean into that feminine, to be able to get more of what you want, to be able to help lift up yourself and others, to shift that balance again, the timing has never been better. So let's dig in. How can we use feminine energy to save the world? And again, remember, you've got resources on that link in the chat if you want to. So the problem is, as you probably gathered from some of what I've been circling here, is that for too long, we've been undervaluing our feminine. And let me use myself as an example. I grew up in a low rental apartment complex in what was considered a tough neighborhood. My dad always taught us that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. So probably not a surprise that from a young age, I wanted to make a difference in the world. I was drawn to the law, social justice issues in particular. So I've practiced over 30 years as a social justice attorney. And in law school, and I've shared this with some people in the C-suite, I took a negotiation course. And then I found out we were basically negotiating for our marks, because you were thrown into a series of simulated negotiations, and whoever got the best negotiated result got the best mark, and the marks got prorated going down. So you can imagine a very competitive law school, things could get a little intense. And I won virtually every simulated negotiation that year. And when I tell this story, let me say, I'm not saying it to brag, but because of the epiphany that came later. Because I have my moment of shame coming that I'm going to share with you here. But at that time, in those negotiations, even though the stakes were so high, I was not negotiating from a competitive place or from that sort of conditioned, more masculine energy or definition of success, that win-lose approach to the negotiation, that idea that toughness carries the day and don't give and don't be vulnerable. I came to every negotiation saying, okay, we've only got 50 minutes or we both get a zero. So there's got to be a great deal here for both of us. What do you need? What do you want? Getting curious, asking questions. I was building rapport. I was bringing empathy to the table. I was building trust. I was having to stay flexible as I found out little bits about what they wanted that maybe took me by surprise, and being able to trust in my intuition. So, dare I say, I was coming from a place of more feminine energy, just naturally, intuitively at that stage. But then I started the actual practice of law. And as I'm sure many of you have experienced in business or in politics or even in community organizations, I was almost always the only woman in the room. And I quickly, a young 20-something coming out of law school, I believed, geesh, if I'm going to be taken seriously here to succeed, I need to get tough. I need to get scrappier. I need to be seen to be scrappier. And so I did. And I was celebrated for it. My reputation grew because I bought into that winner take all, toughness is what carries the day approach. My clients called me the Barracuda, some of you have heard. They meant it as the highest possible compliment. And I am now embarrassed to say I wore it like a badge of honor for a long time. But I started to realize much later, I confess, than I would have liked, there's a really high price to pay, certainly a high price for me. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience when you come to business with that approach, believing that's the path to success. I didn't like who I was becoming. I didn't like how it affected my professional relationships, how it started affecting my personal relationships, how it affected my very sense of self. But it's also a high price for others. Not only those relationships that I had, but also a high price. It used to be a joke. Oh, if you booked a hotel room and they didn't have the room that you booked, watch out, you better hide your children, if Cindy's showing up. And again, people meant that as a compliment. But that's not a great way to live a life, but also a high price for the world. Now, I'm not saying that the world fell out of balance because I lost my feminine. My ego isn't that big. But the point is, it wasn't just me. You see, I wasn't alone. The world is out of balance, I believe. That we're seeing so much chaos and conflict because our feminine and masculine energy is out of balance. So I started looking back going, okay, how has this happened? And if you think about it, our feminine voice has been discounted for generations, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, people used to worship goddesses. In certain cultures, it was women who held the power. It was women who were seen as having the strength in many ways. And somewhere along the line, all of that started to shift and the feminine voice started getting discounted. And we all bought into the myth that we live in a man's world. And again, show of hands how many, I've been guilty of saying it, oh, it's a man's world, it's a man's world. We buy into that myth, we perpetuate that myth that it's a man's world. And then we define, as a result of that, we define success based on that masculine model, that competitive win-lose, toughness carries the day model. And both men and women then stifle their feminine in favor of that more competitive model. It makes sense when you think of it, right? When we set that up as the epiphany to be reached, is the pinnacle to be reached, then we see our feminine as a liability, and that tips the scales. And as I say, I was definitely guilty of that myself. And I think part of it was the insidious nature of the unconscious gender bias that was so powerful and so dangerous, something we need to all raise our awareness about. And because it's no wonder we bought into it. We all carry deeply conditioned gender biases. And I'm not just talking, and let's call it out here, and I've done this before in this group as well. I am not just talking about bias by men against women, which we love to sort of point the finger, but also we have to start recognizing that there is profound unconscious gender bias that comes to play with women against other women and even women against ourselves. And I have shared this often because for me, through all my years of researching on this, one of the things that I found the most staggering and concerning was that in a study of young women writing their SAT exams, where half the control group were asked to simply identify their gender in advance of writing the test, consistently, that half performed more poorly. And I always take a minute to let that sink in, because you got to think of the profound internal gender bias at play, where simply bringing our attention to our femaleness has us underperforming. And as more people then reject their feminine strengths in favor of the masculine, believing with reason because of these biases and all the myriad of ways that the studies show that women get discriminated against and discriminated against ourselves and other women, when we believe that it's the only way to succeed, we get that shift in balance. So how do we start redressing it? Our first and most important negotiation, as I said, is with ourselves, negotiating our own mindset. And again, make no mistake, it is a negotiation and it is a choice. And if you take nothing else away from today, that may be the most profound shift, recognizing that you can choose to negotiate your mindset. And one of the things I invite you to choose now is to recognize the power of your feminine. And I suspect for most of us, that is a shift. We pay lip service to it sometimes, but I mean really deeply at your core, recognize the power of your feminine and be willing to lean into it, even while the rest of the world is still sending messages that that competitive model is the way to succeed. As we start leaning into our feminine and getting those better outcomes, we're going to see a shift back. So a lot of the work that I do with my clients, and I'm speaking now just because we're on that mindset piece, is pushing past limiting beliefs that have, held them back, the limiting beliefs that hold you back, that conditioning from the time we were young girls that we're not enough, that we need to play small or we're going to get cut down, that we need to play nice. How often have we been conditioned for that, right? Make nice, play nice, don't rock the boat. in a way that young boys are never conditioned. So recognizing those limiting beliefs and getting intentional about choosing a mindset that serves you better. Play large, step into the fullness of your power without apology and without embarrassment and without shame. You don't have to play small to succeed. You don't have to play nice in the traditional ways we think of that. And recognize and overcome maybe the blocks that are stopping you, believing that we don't deserve more. Resistance to receiving. Heck, women, we resist receiving compliments, let alone gifts or more. I mean, we believe we need to be the givers, the nurturers, the carers. So we have really deeply conditioned resistance to receiving, which is the kiss of death in a negotiation. You need to be open to be able to receive. And also blocks like what I call a one-day mindset, which I find, again, women tend to be more likely to be guilty of. We are so conditioned to put our dreams and our visions on hold while we take care of everybody else. It's like, well, when this happens, I'll get to that. One day when I hit this marker, when I have this particular accolade or degree, we feel we're never enough and we're always waiting, and even fears that hold us back. So obviously we don't have time today to do that mindset work together, but I really wanted to spend at least a couple of minutes on it because I invite you to explore what holds you back. And certainly feel free, grab a copy of my book or take a look at some of a whole section deals with the kind of conditioning that holds us back from stepping into the fullness of their power. So I hope I've at least convinced you that this idea is important about stepping into our feminine. And let's turn now to how can you apply the art of feminine negotiation in your life? And what exactly do I mean when I say that? I thought the easiest thing, the most valuable for you today is for me to share 3 simple models that are part of, a much larger system, but a really key part of the art of feminine negotiation. Preparation is key in negotiations. And that's whether it's personal or professional. And I want to take a moment to hit that point again. We often don't think about our personal relationships, again, whether it's with intimate partners or our kids or family, friends, we don't think of those as negotiations. And so we don't prepare. And when we don't prepare, it's why so many family dynamics are dysfunctional and why there's so many communication errors. You need to prepare for your personal negotiations in the same way that you would for a business negotiation. And my models may be a little different than what you've been taught or what you've been conditioned or even what you've read about negotiation, because I think everybody so focuses on the sort of micro tactics and strategies that they miss the most important foundational elements of how to be a really effective negotiator, to move the dial, to get those best outcomes. So as part of your preparation, practice and invoke these 3 simple models for any of your negotiations or difficult conversations, whatever you want to call it. And in fact, any one of the models that I'm going to share with you here today, if you even invoke any aspect of any of them, I guarantee you it will up-level your negotiation prowess. Now, we're only going to have time today, obviously, for me to introduce the concepts, but I really wanted to give you enough of a taste, that little taste, so that you can see their value, I hope, I trust, and come away with also some concrete skills that you can start implementing right away. So I want you to go through these model checklists in this order. And again, you've got access to a little deeper dive. Just click the link. At some point before, save your chat so you've got access to the link. The first one is what I call the no fear model. And I love acronyms, so I like to keep it simple. So it's just no fear, FEAR, and that stands for fear, ego, attachment, and reactivity. So why is that important? Okay, most conflict arises from a sense of powerlessness, right? Much like our misguided concepts of success, as I was saying, I'd suggest that, our conditioning around power, I think, contributes to today's problem. We seek to exert, when we think of power, we think about exerting power over others, right? Control over others, rather than power with. I've done a lot of writing. I've got articles. Feel free to check out my blogs as well on if any of these particular issues, just reach out. I'm happy to direct you to particular things that pique your interest. But I think this is a really important mindset shift as well, recognizing that we want to have power with instead of power over. Because that desire to control often comes from a place of fear. And it's why so many negotiations fall apart. So I really advocate as part of your preparation for any negotiation, again, whether personal, professional, or global, again, the principles are the same, do a quick check-in on my no fear scale. So as I go through each item now, I invite you to, think of a difficult conversation that maybe you have coming up and consider how this check-in might help you get better outcomes. So feel free to jot notes away, and then you can practice using it in your next conversation. So the F is fear. So I really invite you to ask yourself, what fears might be driving me? Or what fears might show up in this negotiation? Does this negotiation trigger maybe a fear of failure? Do I have a bit of a fear of rejection here? Do I suffer from a fear of missing out, FOMO? Do I have a fear of the unknown? Am I the person who needs to dot every I and cross every T because there's that niggling fear that I'm going to miss something, that there's something I just don't know? For women as well, we often don't recognize a fear of success. Are we sabotaging unconsciously in our negotiations because at some level, there's a fear of what happens if I do actually step into the fullness of my power? Or, the old famous fear of being judged. The list goes on, but the point is, consider what fears might actually be driving you or come up for you and think, how can I use my awareness of these fears to fuel me to show up better in this negotiation so I don't get triggered by them? And here's the part that most people forget. Equally, if not more importantly, then consider what fears might be driving the other party and how can I use that to show up better for them? Because if fear is what triggers most people to try and exert power over, control over, this is what causes that pushback. This is why so many negotiations become that win-lose conflict when there are gorgeous opportunities for better outcomes right there that both parties are missing. So it's a huge shift when you're able to sit back and recognize your fears and the fears of the other party, and how can you use that information to get those better outcomes? The E is for ego. Consider, how does ego show up for me? And you got to be honest. This is tough, right? You've got to be ruthlessly honest with yourself. How does ego show up for me? Because we often go through life kind of like bumper car egos, right? I mean, we're always bumping our egos up against each other in life, jostling to get that little upper edge in that competitive model. So I really invite you, and this may be a shift for some of you, but how can I keep my ego out of my negotiation? So I don't make this about me, but instead I make it about them. And I know that seems very counterintuitive, but trust me, after 30 years doing high stakes negotiations, having been the barracuda, where I had great success, don't get me wrong, but at a high cost, versus coming from this more compassionate, collaborative approach, where the outcomes are so much better, with better buy-in, longer lasting agreements, better relationships, more creative solutions as well. So how can I keep my ego about it? And if I invite you, if you ever in your negotiations find yourself making it about you, immediately stop in that moment and switch your focus to the other party. At that very moment, get curious, ask questions. And again, if you're thinking, how do I know if ego is showing up? If you need to win, right? If you see it as a win-lose, ego's in the house. If you find that you're talking too much, which is not unusual because we've been conditioned to believe the person talking the loudest and the longest must be winning. Wow, they're powerful, they're dynamic, they're winning, they're controlling the negotiation. The opposite is true. If all you want is the bluster of your ego, then sure. But if you actually want to get best outcomes, that is the worst possible strategy. So if you find you're talking too much, again, stop, drop, and roll and flip the focus. If you're not admitting that you don't know things, ego is in the house. And also for a lot of women, a need to be liked, which people don't think of as ego, but there is ego there as well. Even though we may think it's because we are being, cooperative or compliant and we are trying to satisfy, that need to be liked is another form of ego. And then again, as always, consider how might ego show up for the other party and how can I actually use that to get a better outcome? Let them have their ego, frankly, and use that to get those better outcomes. The A is for attachment. So again, it takes a lot of reflection. And the more you practice this happens really, really quickly. At first, it takes a little bit of practice, but as you start to do this, it's actually a very quick check-in, right? As part of your prep process. So think, what might I be too attached to in this conversation or in this particular negotiation? And how can I stay flexible so I don't miss opportunities for better outcomes? In my 30 years, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people walk away from great deals that would have been, a fabulous outcome for them because they got too attached and inflexible to a particular idea. Or at the other end, I've seen people who kept negotiating long past the point when it made sense to, because they became too attached to the deal. And I've been guilty as well. I shouldn't be saying other people, we've all been guilty of it, certainly. So consider what things you might be too attached to. And then again, what might the other party be too attached to? And think in advance as part of your preparation, how can I plan to move the dial on that by understanding it and being able to come play to their ego, understand their needs, find the things they're attached to, and use that to your benefit. And the final of the 4 in our no fear model is the R is for reactivity. And again, it takes being really honest. What are my triggers? What things may cause me to be reactive, and how can I address it? Thinking about that in advance diffuses its power. It's really important, right? When we consider what things trigger us, where we get reactive, it reduces the chance of that reactivity actually derailing us then when it matters. You be prepared in advance so that you can then quickly ground yourself and stay focused on the objective, not your ego, not your reactivity. And again, equally, if not more, is always important. What triggers are likely to cause reactivity in the other party, and how can you avoid that? If you know there are learn as much as you can about the person on the other side, right, of the other party, and what are words that are likely to trigger them, concepts that are likely to trigger them, approaches, body language, what are things that you either know or have learned can cause a reaction in that other person and trigger them, and then get intentional about avoiding that. Because again, the old school model, and I did a lot of trade union bargaining, so you can imagine there was a lot of chest beating and table pounding and stomping out of the room, slamming books, back in the early days. And people used to see that as a sign of power. The opposite is true. And I'm not saying there are never, obviously you need to be prepared to know when to walk away from a negotiation, but that's different than doing it because you've been triggered because of your reactivity to something that happened. So let me share just to that model, a personal example to give you some context in a real life situation. And I'm choosing a personal example only because I find business examples tend to be less likely to stick. So if I share something personal, the concept is more likely to stick for you. And then you can take that concept and apply it in your personal and your professional. And, if you're operating on a higher sphere, even in any global sort of conflict or issues that you're dealing with. So the example I'll share to illustrate, my son, and I'm being very vulnerable here, my son was diagnosed with a quite serious mental health issue. This was early in COVID. He was hospitalized for, an extended period of time. I obviously stressed to the max. Access was a huge issue. If you recall earlier in COVID, you had to negotiate visiting rights, and I was constantly having to bring everything to bear to negotiate. And on that piece of it, dealing with the administration and with the nursing staff and all of the bureaucracy, I applied my models very successfully. And I was able, when other people weren't getting visitation at all, I was able to negotiate for one person to visit, then use that to leverage to get 2 of us to visit. At first, it was for 1 hour. I got to leverage it for extended visits and kept using every little bit I got to leverage for more visitation rights. Resources were an issue. Again, had to negotiate at every level. I was intentional about that. But where I lost the plot, at least in the early stages, because it was so personal and so emotional, I was terrified about what this meant for my son. Obviously, his future, my hopes and dreams for him felt like they were shattering in a million pieces during this period. And I didn't realize until later I was grieving, obviously, right? You could tell I still have emotional think of that, right? It was a grieving process. And my son, as you can imagine, being in the hospital for 6 weeks, but especially in those early phases, he was angry. He blamed us for being there. And I, of course, as a mother, I'm being defensive, thinking, okay, if I can just frame it properly, if I can just get the right set of facts, if I can just explain it a little better, then he's going to understand. It was all about defending me because he was angry at me and we butted heads. And then I sat back and I realized, I had my aha moment going, I am totally not practicing what I preach here. I need to bring my own models to the table here and do my preparation before we have our next visit. I had to face my fear, my ego, my attachment, and my reactivity. I had to decide, how can I let go of some of that fear? How can I let go of my ego and surrender to making it about him? How can I let go of all of these hopes and dreams and things that I was so attached to, pushing to get to make sure they happen? And how could I let go of my reactivity to the situation, to his anger, to his blaming? How could I make it about him? How could I put myself fully in his shoes? And I'm sharing this example because this is important again in any negotiation professionally. You have to put yourself truly, fully in the shoes of the other party if you want to get best outcomes. And we are not trained to do that. We pay lip service to it, but we do not do that very well in North America in particular. So I then brought my no fear model to the table and I really imagined his fear. I was focused on his fear must have been devastating, overwhelming. He was in a facility where he had no control. He knew he couldn't leave if he wanted to. His entire life had been turned upside down. People were pegging him with a diagnosis that he did not believe. He didn't think he had the problem. So his sense of fear, his ego, his sense of self had to have been shattered. His attachment to his old life, to the things that mattered, to not being seen with this new label. So I showed up the next time and I apologized, and I showed up from a total place of curiosity and empathy. And at first, and I anticipated going through the model, he's going to be resistant because he won't believe it at first. And I need to not get reactive to that. I need to be able to stay grounded. And as I stayed just on the course saying, I can't imagine what this is like for you. I have been making this all about me. I really want to hear what's your experience. What is this like for you? What can I do for you? What do you need? And trying to get, and as he saw that I was staying, even when he threw it all at me, right? All of the triggers that would have normally caused me to be reactive, all that anger. But when I stuck to that no fear model, there was a physical softening. It was remarkable. And that opened the space for us to find solutions, to understand better his needs, understand him better, and to heal. And it was a very powerful shift. So I really invite you to think about how you might apply this concept in your personal life, in your professional life, and beyond. How might we apply it to global conflicts? Look below the surface to the unstated needs in any conflict. I think of Russia right now as well. If you apply that fear, ego, attachment, and reactivity, it's easy to just say, oh, they're just crazy, they're dictator, they're this, they're impossible. Get curious, because there's ego and attachment and fears that underlay those positions. So you need to understand that personally, professionally, and globally. So once you've gone through the no fear checklist, next, I want you to consider what I call the 5W model. Just simply who, what, where, when, why. So under who, just to give you a little flavor, who are you? What role? Are you showing up as mom? Are you showing up as CEO? Or are you showing up as a concerned care worker, right? So, and also, who do you want to show up as? In other words, what qualities? Do you want to be bold, adventurous? Do you want to be present, compassionate? Choose who, i.e. how you want to show up. Who will the other party expect you to show up as? When we show up differently than someone's expectations, there's a powerful shift that happens in that. Who are you negotiating with? Who should you be negotiating with? Who's going to be impacted by your negotiations? This is just a very brief sampling to give you an idea. And again, the ebook resource that I've attached in the link you've got here will go deeper to give you a whole lot more who questions to contemplate as part of your preparation. Just imagine, and again, I say, even if you take nothing else away, imagine how different your next negotiation will be if you simply get intentional about these who items. Who do I want to show up as? Who am I in terms of my role? Who will they expect me to show up as? Who are they likely to show up as? So you can prepare for all of those eventualities, right? Are they going to be a bully? Are they going to be, trustworthy? Consider all of that. Who should you be negotiating with? Think of the power of that simple shift alone. And then your what. Again, a whole list of different what with what body language, what micro. I won't go into that today, but at the very least, I wanted to share. Consider always 3 outcomes in terms of the what. Most people go, well, I know what I want. And they're always just thinking of the substantive thing. But I invite you to always go deeper because you want to put yourself above most negotiators, right? You want to show up with more skill. So also consider what of the process of the negotiations. Sometimes negotiating a process in the long term can be way more valuable than the what. You might actually come to a process for pricing, for example, that you negotiate that is bad for you in the short term, but is going to be incredibly lucrative in the long term. So don't get so focused on the what you're getting, that substantive thing right now. Also think of negotiating process. And the one I find gets most often forgotten is relationship. Sometimes the relationship outcome is more important than the what that you're negotiating about. And people recognize this more in their personal, but it also applies in your professional relationships. But I also remind you in your personal too, right? Sometimes we get so caught up in that competitive spirit that we forget that the relationship is actually more important. So same whether with your clients, with suppliers in your business, whether you're dealing with banks or insurance institutions, recognize when the relationship outcome might be as if not more important than whatever it is you're negotiating about in that moment. So that's the who, the what, and then the where. Location, 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 key in real estate. There's a reason for that. Setting in books, authors spend an inordinate amount of time creating the right setting. The where is important in your negotiations, right? And again, whether personally or professionally, some negotiations, you want to create mood, atmosphere, consider access to information. Where you negotiate has a profound impact potentially on your outcomes. And the when. As kids, we knew timing was important, right? We didn't ask our parents for that thing if we knew they were in a crappy mood. So consider your when to the extent that you can with intention. And finally, the last W is your why. I often use the iceberg analogy. What people say they want, sometimes even what they think they want, is the tip of the iceberg. It's that 70 to 80% that's under the surface, those unstated needs, sometimes unconsidered needs, that is actually what drives the heart of the negotiation. So when you tap into your deep why and understand it, and consider the deep why of the other party, you are going to be leaps and bounds ahead in your ability to get better outcomes. So imagine what a game changer to apply this simple 5W method to your next negotiation as well. And again, just to keep that context, going back to the example with my son, after I'd gone through that no fear model as part of my prep for our next visit, I turned to my 5W model. Who, right? Who did I want to show up as? I wanted to be compassionate and caring and present, so fully present when I was there. Who did he expect me to show up as? Defensive, controlling. Certainly that would have been his perception. Who was he likely to show up as? Angry, untrusting, with good reason, given our earlier conversation, right? So considering in advance, what outcome did I really need? I thought I needed him to buy in. I needed control over the process. But when I really dug, what I really needed as an outcome was for him to feel fully seen and heard, and that he mattered. I needed his sense of self to not be destroyed in this experience. And again, where? At first I thought, well, I don't have any control over that. Really, this isn't one of those situations where it applies. But always dig a little deeper, because sure enough, when I got there, I thought, no, actually it does matter. And I asked to switch rooms where we met so that we weren't sitting across the table from each other. But instead, and I invite you for this, normally in any business negotiation, we tend to have that sort of traditional boardroom table. We sit across from each other. I invite you to consider your where with intention. Maybe you get out of the boardroom setting altogether. Or as in this case, I asked to get a room where we had couches and or chairs, and we sat in like a little circle, or, when there were three of us, a triangle. We're not in a competitive, adversarial, confrontational across from each other. We're not on sides of the table. Now we're working together. The setting itself was more collaborative. And again, consider the when. Even from something like the time of day, I thought, what time of the day is my son going to be at his best? What time of the day, what medication, when does he get his medication, and what impact might that have, right? So consider, and the same in your professional negotiations. And again, what was my deep why? It wasn't what I thought it was at first. My deep why, when I really thought about it, is I want him healthy. I want him happy. I want his self-esteem intact, right? That's more important than my defense or controlling the agenda. So once I was done no fear in the 5W, the next and the last layer that I'm going to share today is what I call the R fit. And this is not to overwhelm you, but I want to at least touch on that third model of the trilogy sort of framework. And this is the last one that I invite you to apply in your prep, but this was actually the first one that I discovered on my journey to creating the art of feminine negotiation. Because when I examined all the elements, like, what skills actually make the most effective negotiators? It came down to 6 key skills. And again, you'll have access to this in the link that I've attached. So you can just sort of take this in at the moment, but it's assertiveness, rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, and trust. And I'm sure you've heard that's come up a lot, even in our brief conversation here together today. These are those key skills that make and mark the most effective negotiators through history. If you look at your Martin Luther Kings or Nelson Mandela's or your Obama or some of our people that we would consider to be really exceptional negotiators, they are people who are able to invoke these key skills. Someone like Oprah, against all odds to negotiate the empire that she did. Trust me, she was bringing empathy and rapport building skills and trust building and intuition to the table. So I've created a really simple mnemonic to help you. Just think R-FIT, A-R-E-F-I-T. That's the 6 qualities. And just think you are fit to be a great negotiator. So leaving aside assertiveness for a moment, you may have noticed 5 out of 6 of those factors, rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, and trust, are interestingly skills that people would consider soft skills or feminine traits. And even assertiveness, it's typically the one of the 6 that's considered to be more masculine, but I think that's because people conflate assertive with aggressive, and they are not the same thing at all. Assertiveness comes from confidence. Confidence comes from knowledge. Knowledge comes from prep. I've just given you 3 models that you can dig deep on that will have you infinitely more prepared than 90% or more of negotiators out there. It's that simple. The key is adopting these so-called feminine traits or skills. And yet our entire systems, when you think of it, economic, business, political, almost all of them operate on predominantly masculine competitive models, when the more effective route is actually the opposite. So people who show up and invoke these so-called feminine skills get better outcomes, more creative outcomes, better buy-in, less conflict, longer lasting agreements, better relationships, more positive impact, which is important, again, personally, professionally, or globally. So again, just really quickly coming back to that example with my son, after going through the no fear checklist, considering my 5W model, then the last layering, if you will, is to bring that R-FIT model intention. So I had to think, okay, how can I kickstart this conversation by building rapport? What can I do? What can I say? What are some things I can do to build rapport? How can I bring empathy? How can I make sure I stay flexible, trust my intuition, build trust with him, and be assertive? And by that, I mean, show up with the confidence that I knew I prepared for this and I was going to be okay. I was not going to be a pushover, but I also was going to show up from that space. So I hope you're beginning to see the power of these simple models and shifts. Now, we've just scratched the surface of what I call, my art of feminine negotiation systems, but I really hope you can see the value and why I'm so excited about speaking with this group in particular, but getting this message out there generally, because the potential is right here in the palm of our hands. Just some very simple shifts, some simple reframes. There is profound potential impact. So I actually invite you to just close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world where we all negotiate life from a place of that powerful feminine persuasion, where we're seeking to build stronger relationships, not coming from a place of competition, not looking just to meet our needs, but also really trying to understand and meet the needs of others, valuing and respecting our differences and stepping into the best of our humanity. And the gift of that sounds very woo-woo to a lot of people, and they assume it means we're giving up. But the irony is that the gift of the approach is that it actually amplifies your success in getting what you want and need. By focusing on the other party and trying to understand their position, you have exponentially increased your opportunity to get more of what you actually need, because it will pave the path for even better solutions. So I'm super passionate about the subject. As Kathleen said, my book came out. It hit #2 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. The physical copy is launching next month, so be sure to grab a copy of that. I offer personal or corporate training. And again, if anyone here is interested in exploring the concept of negotiating your best life, whether personally or at the corporate level, happy to go deeper and have a call on it. But I wanted to end by saying I call on you all here, be the change to shift the world out of the fear and uncertainty that has come from that masculine model, that more competitive model. Be the shift out of fear and uncertainty into the powerful resilience of possibility, because we all deserve that. So now I think we will open the floor for Q&A.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Cindy, fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. I mean, you just gave us a tremendous masterclass in the art of feminine negotiation with your 3 different models. I mean, you delivered, lady. Thank you so much. My goodness. Yeah. So as we wind down, any burning questions? And of course, Cindy, we can connect with you on LinkedIn, of course, and on your website. You're on Facebook. You're all over social, and your podcast is fantastic. And you're a C-suite network member, thought leader, and esteemed faculty member in our council too. So you're everywhere, spreading the word about the art of feminine negotiation. Yeah, great.
And again, there's definitely a link here, but also you can just go to either artoffemininenegotiation.com or womenonpurpose.ca and access all kinds of resources that are there as well, or reach out by all means. So
beautiful, beautiful, great.
Some of the concepts, and I'll let you filter any questions that we have here, Kathleen.
Yeah,
so
thank you. Yeah, if you have a question before we complete our time, we'd love take yourself off. If you could come on camera, that would be fabulous. And we'll wrap up with Cindy, because your program was tremendous, Cindy. I mean, it was great. Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. Question or even your biggest takeaway as we complete our
I just loved it. I love the system. I already know that you got to go in to the meeting with both parties given and win for each, but I love the system. Cindy, my question for you is the boardroom. There's a fear of females in the boardroom, we all know. Okay, so would you say stick to the systems, hybrid it once you're at that level?
Great question. And I would say
negotiation when you're sitting there with 11 men and you're the only woman in the room.
Yeah, I think still definitely it's an excellent question, and stick to the systems. And it takes some practice at first, and have some, like one of the things we talk about certainly in my programs is how to have certain things in your pocket, if you will, ready to bring out, because statistically, women still get interrupted. We get talked over. Men take our ideas and don't give credit. So just being ready to sort of speak up there as well and say, sorry, just a moment. And rather than bringing that more, because I used to do the ball buster approach, right? It was like anything you could do, I could give you. I'm going to bully my way in there as well, right? And it felt like there was success there, but there was a lot of resistance, a lot of pushback, and it wasn't great for that relationship building. By contrast, I'm finding, and it came as a surprise to me as I started really digging in, even if you're dealing with bullies or in that boardroom, to be able to say, I need to stop you for a second there, Joe. I know it's even and especially when he's not acting like it. I know it's really important to you to treat or whatever variation of this works for you, right, Laura? But I know it's really important to you to treat people with dignity and respect. So I'm sure you didn't mean to, but I've been passed over twice here. I just wanted to make sure that everybody got this point because I think it's an important point I wanted to add to the table. So you're not calling them out in a way that's going to cause that reactivity on their part by embarrassing them or have it become sort of a gender conflict where they feel the need to exert power over. You've invited them to step up to the best version of themselves. And it is surprising how often when you say, I know it's really important to you that you treat people in that, sort of in the boardroom with absolute dignity, or I know it's important to you that everybody's views are heard, or however in that moment, but have some version of that sort of ready to go. And that's not to say, don't forget the first A in our FIT is assertive. There are times when you're going to have to step up, but I normally would only do that after I have first sort of invited them to be the best version of themselves. When I've reflected back what they say, even if I disagree, I call it elevated active listening. We hear a lot about reflecting back to people what they've said. I actually believe you get more when you take it a step further. When you disagree with somebody's position, or even if you don't, frankly, you reflect back what they say even more graciously than they framed it themselves, because it kind of it takes them by surprise and they're like, oh, she does get what I'm saying. In fact, she framed it better than I could have myself. So she definitely gets the argument. And subconsciously, it triggers a reciprocity where, unless you're dealing with a sociopath, and then different rules apply, but it typically will trigger a reciprocity. And if you're being talked to, if somebody takes your idea, and again, without going, oh, what the hell, right? Here we go again, men taking our ideas, which immediately triggers that sort of reactivity. If you're calling somebody a sexist or a racist, you're not going to win them over in that approach. But if you say, oh, thanks, Joe, for taking my idea and amplifying it, right? So now you make sure that you're getting credit for the idea. So yes, I think we're in a transition period, but absolutely, Laura, I think if you bring these consistently to the table and start practicing ways to show up as the best version of yourself and invite others to be the same, things start to shift. And I've been able to get way better outcomes than my old screw you, I'm going to one up you approach.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Cindy, your models are in your book. And so we can, I'm inspired, and so many great takeaways, but I'm inspired to just take one of the 3 models that you talked about today and just practice it and see how that goes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's complete our time. Wow, what a program. Thank you, Sparkle Fingers.
And can we grab a screenshot if we've got, I don't know if we can get everybody. I'm
Absolutely.
not seeing everybody here, but if people are comfortable, it'd be fun to grab a screenshot of everybody just giving a little wave here.
Yeah, great. Good, thank you. Good.
Awesome.
Okay, good. So let's finish up. And thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Coughing. I think we'll just end on that. Cindy, thank you so much.
Awesome.
See you in
My
the next
pleasure.
program.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Take care.
you. Thanks.